All right, hello everyone, Eric Marks, findingmiddleearth.com, and today on the channel we're going to do something that we never do. We're going to talk about Sony cameras. So typically I only talk about my Nikon and my Fujifilm cameras because those are the only two brands that I own. But today, on, what's the date today? April 19th. Today Sony released the A9, and a lot of people have been asking me about this. That's why I'm making this video. Okay, it's the only reason I'm making this video is because I kid you not, I have about 30 emails so far, and the camera's only been released for a few hours, about 30 emails asking me how it stacks up against the Fujifilm X-T2 for a sports camera, and how it stacks up against this and this. So first off, I don't have the camera. Nobody has the camera right now except for the people at the press event and maybe a few of the Sony artisan photographers, kind of their ambassador, line of photographers where they give the cameras out kind of pre-release. So I don't have the camera, so I'm not qualified to tell you whether it's good, bad, better than the X-T2, but I can give you my thoughts, okay? I can't give you facts, but I can give you my thoughts, and I want to also straighten out a few things based on the emails that I've gotten. So I've come up with a little, a little list of pros and cons, I guess you could say, and some of the things about the camera that I think are nice, and some of the things that, kind of the past history of Sony. We'll talk about the history of Sony and why there might be some red flags, going into this system. So first off, I have owned the Sony A7, A7R, A7 II, and A7R II. So I've definitely owned my fair share of Sony full-frame cameras. I've owned their entire A7 line up to this point. So the reason why I never kept any of them, and by the way, I did very thorough testing on them. I took them to Disney World, I took them on landscape shoots, and I want to say right now the image quality was fantastic. The dynamic range was fantastic. I just didn't like the ergonomics, I didn't like the menu system, I didn't like that it was not very easy access for a lot of the main settings and stuff that I used. And there was just, basically the camera just didn't work for the way I was used to shooting and for just the way that I shoot. So that's not to say that it's a bad camera. I'm just not a huge fan of the Sony system and how Sony kind of runs their business, which we'll talk about that a little later. So first off, the Sony A9. They're kind of marketing this for sports shooters and wildlife shooters. They're calling it the camera of speed. It's this Speed Demon 20 frames per second full frame camera. So let's talk about that first. This camera shoots 20 frames per second, and it's a 35mm full frame mirrorless camera. That is an engineering marvel in itself, so I'll give Sony credit for that. 20 frames per second on a full frame camera, that's really good. Okay, that's good. I can't really, I can't harp on them about that. Now, of course, your next question will probably be, well, 20 frames per second, what's my buffer, right? How many frames can I fire off without the computer system having to write to the card? Well, so let's cover some of the pros real quick. So one of the pros is you can actually shoot 241 14-bit RAW files without stopping before the buffer kind of coughs up. That's actually really nice. So 20 frames per second, you can crank that off for 241 consecutive RAW shots, 14-bit RAW files, before the buffer gives out. That's nice. And then you can shoot 362 JPEG files. That's probably what most people are going to be doing because most of the sports photographers that I know shoot in JPEG so that they can crank as many off as they can. They'll, give the card to their assistant or whatever, they'll run and pop them in the machine, they'll pop in another card, and it's just this perpetual, giving as many images to your assistant as you can to crank out to the magazines. So a lot of people are going to be happy that you can crank out 362 JPEGs at one time at 20 frames per second. That's actually a nice feature. It has 693 autofocus points. It's a phase detect system. That sounds amazing, but I have no clue how it performs because I don't have the camera in my hand, so I can't speak to that. But I can tell you that 693 autofocus points covering 93% of the sensor sounds very promising. It has a silent shutter that shoots up to 1/32,000th of a second. The silent shutter thing is very nice. And that's kind of what they're really marketing, hard on this camera, that it's a silent camera. But what's funny is mirrorless cameras have never been that loud to begin with. They've never been really that clunky like DSLRs. I guess that's a cool feature if you really need that. I just hope it doesn't, in low light, let's hope that it doesn't render the banding issues that some of the other electronic shutter features have before. It shouldn't, since they're making this camera as a silent shutter camera, but just, keep that in mind. It shoots 4K video, at 100 megabits per second. It shoots 1080 video at 120 frames per second at 100 megabits per second. So 1080p 120 is actually really nice for some buttery, smooth, slow-mo stuff. A lot of the video shooters are already pretty angry because it doesn't have log mode, so you cannot shoot in log. If you're a videographer, that will definitely matter to you. But I don't think this is being marketed as a video camera. That's going to be your A7S Mark II. And then also another pro that they're really marketing is the no blackout shooting. So your live view and your EVF now, it doesn't black out, you know, when you're cranking off these 20 frames per second. They're promising that it's going to be very similar to an optical viewfinder where you're just shooting and the only blackout you get is that little flicker of the shutter that you can see. But apparently you're not even going to get that because obviously it's a mirrorless camera and it's just chimping off the sensor. So again, I don't have the camera in my hands. You know, I don't know how well this is going to work, but from what I've seen so far, I've watched a few live streams of the announcement, and it seems like the no blackout thing is working out very well, and people seem to be pretty happy with the buffer. So again, it's a nice camera. It's going to take beautiful pictures. You just have to figure out if it's for you. So let's talk about some of the things that we'll call them cons, or we'll call them red flags to watch out for, whatever you want to call it. First thing is the XQD slot. So it has two SD card slots, okay, dual slots. That's nice. But how weird is it that Sony created the XQD technology, and if this is a sports camera that it is marketed for speed, why doesn't it at least have one XQD slot or dual XQD slots? That's just crazy to me. You know, it's crazy that Sony themselves didn't put their own technology, the XQD slots, in the camera. Apparently it just has dual SD, and then one of the SD slots is a UHS-2 compatible slot. So that's nice, you know, UHS-2, but it would have been killer to see the dual XQD card slots in the camera. So then, of course, let's get to the price. It's $4,500 US. That's good if you're looking at the Nikon D5 and the Canon 1DX series cameras, because, you know, that's going to beat them by, you know, over a couple $1,000s, depending on which camera you go with. So, you know, I guess the biggest question people have been asking is, how does it stack up against, you know, these other cameras? Keep in mind, I'm not a professional sports photographer, but I think this camera is a little overpriced for what you get, because here's the kicker for me. So, battery life, they're really marketing it as better battery life. The battery life still is about a 480 shot battery life. If you're a professional sports shooter and you see 480 shots on a battery, you're probably just going to look the other way. And we're talking about pros. We're not talking about people that enjoy going out and shooting nature and shooting sports, because I think those kind of people, the semi-pros or hobbyist sports people, those are going to be the people that they're going to think are going to buy this. But if you're a Sports Illustrated, you know, you're going to show up to the Olympics and shoot something, I don't think, and this is just my opinion, I don't think they're going to buy this camera and shoot with it. And here's another con for me, because I'm a Fujifilm X-T2 user. It does have a battery grip, but the battery grip still only allows you to do the 2 batteries in the grip, and that's it. My X-T2 allows me to put 1 battery in the camera and 2 in the grip, so I have a total of 3 batteries. That would have been really nice to see Sony do that, since they completely redesigned this camera with a new grip. It would have been great to see that new technology introduced, because then the battery life wouldn't have been such a con, because you have 3 full batteries in there. And then, of course, another con, or not really con, but you know, a big thing that's going to be concerning for sports shooters is lenses, right? The lack of lenses. Sony still doesn't have any, you know, really promising 300, 400, 600 millimeter prime lenses that are really sports ready. You know, professional NFL games, basketballs, Olympics. You know, these people always bring their 300, 400, 600 mil primes. So with this camera, Sony did release a 100 to 400, 4.5 to 5.6 lens. I'm sure it's going to be a great lens. I don't know if it's going to be amazing for sports compared to the primes that Nikon and Canon have on the market. Yes, you can always adapt those lenses, but you know, who's going to know how well an adapted lens is going to focus at 600 millimeters? You know, we don't know until, you know, we see the camera in people's hands and watch the reviews. The ISO capability is 100 to 51,200. Then it's extendable up to 100 and something thousand. Honestly, I thought the ISO was going to be a little better than that. Not that that's bad by any means. And so I'm sure it's going to do well in low light. So let me tell you my kind of concluding thoughts here. I think that this camera is more so going to appeal to wedding photographers, because a lot of wedding photographers that I know did switch to the Sony system years ago, and they switched to it when it was the first, the first A7, and then the A7 II came out. But the people that had the A7 II were still complaining about slower focus during weddings and during low light situations. So a lot of those people would get the A63 and A6500. But now that you have this full frame, what looks like it's going to be a beastly focusing camera, I think wedding photographers are really going to get on board with this thing, because you have the in-body stabilization and you have what seems to be crazy autofocus in better low light focus. Again, don't know if that's actually going to be true when you're using it real world, because I have never used the camera. But I think more wedding photographers and hobbyist wildlife photographers are going to gravitate towards this than the pro shooter, market for sports like Sony is trying to market to. I could be completely wrong, and don't take any of my word as facts. These are all my opinions. And so this brings me to the kind of my last thing here. Let me make sure I covered all my points. Wedding photographers, yeah, the lenses, we covered all that. Great, so we covered all the points. So, this is what my conclusion is. And I was talking about this with my friend Joseph. We've been texting, actually I just got another text from Joseph now. Me and my friend Joseph talk cameras all the time, and so when this camera released, both of us are, firing back and forth about what we think is going to happen with it. And this is the biggest red flag with Sony. So, if you look at Sony's history, the way they crank out cameras every 5 minutes, what scares me about getting into a Sony system, okay, let's just say that I'm considering buying this camera. I'm not at all, but let's say that I am. What would scare me about buying this camera for $4,500 is that over the next 6 months, when photographers find things wrong with the camera and maybe things that are missing that they would like to see in the next model, the issue is, based on the history of Sony, Sony's probably just going to say, oh, okay, well, we need to listen to half the photographers that are having problems, and we'll put in these new features, and then we'll release the A9 Mark II in 12 months later. And then they're going to want the same $4,500 for it. And then the A9 might go down to $4,000. And so then they're just going to want another $4,500 when I get the 2 upgrades that I thought were missing. And then I'm going to wish that I would have waited another 12 months so that I could just use my money on the A9 Mark II. And then when the A9 Mark II comes out, and 6 months later, photographers figure out what's missing on that, well, then they might release the A9 Mark III or the A10, A11, and it's just this perpetual game of Sony constantly releasing more cameras to fix problems, and they keep wanting your money instead of just giving you firmware upgrades or actually listening to their photographers. So that's my biggest issue here, is that this is going to be a great camera. It's going to have great image quality. It's going to do a lot of good things. It's probably going to sell very well to the people that love Sony and to the people that are just researching this on a, is this camera for me kind of, point of view based on the speed and the specs. I'm sure it'll do well. And I'm not trying to harp on Sony as a company here, okay? I'm not trying to be really negative. I'm just saying, if you look at the company history, they typically release cameras so fast that they cannibalize their own cameras so fast, and you the people that bought the first or second models kind of get left in the dust because they spent the original large amount of money, and when they first got the camera, they're like, oh great, this is this great new toy, and then they start thinking, well, I wish it had this, this, and this, and then 12 months later, Sony releases that camera with this, this, and this, and they just want your money all over again. So yeah. That's kind of my thoughts on the camera. I'm not going to speak to how it compares to the Fujifilm X-T2 because it doesn't compare. The Fujifilm X-T2, excuse me, isn't a sports camera. It's just a photographer's camera. I think you can do kind of anything with the X-T2. That's what makes it so great and versatile. I think you can shoot weddings, landscapes, sports. You can do a lot of things. So I don't even want to get into that, the Sony versus Fuji thing. That's all about brand loyalty, what camera is actually for you. At the end of the day, if you're asking me, is the Sony A9 for me, Eric? I would tell you a few things. Number one, don't listen to me because I don't know what kind of photography you shoot. I'm just giving you my thoughts. If you want actual advice on how to find out if the camera is for you, wait for it to come out, watch videos, read reviews, see it in people's hands, see how it performs in real world situations, wait for it to hit one of the renting companies, and then rent it. And use it with your genre of photography. If you love it, buy one. If it works perfectly, buy one. By the time you wait to rent it, they might have already released the A9 Mark II. So then, best of both worlds. Then maybe you get the second version. So, you have to do your own research here. I always just like to provide my opinion because now that my channel is growing so fast and I talk about Nikon and Fuji so much, every time someone else releases a camera, I always get emails asking how it stacks up. And people say, you know, should I buy this? So I want to end by saying, all the people that ask me, should they buy something, I never respond with yes or no. Always know that. I'm always going to tell you it's all based on what you need with your photography. Because if you're a macro shooter that likes to go around and shoot nothing but flowers, I'm going to recommend something completely different than someone that likes to go around and shoot, you know, birds in flight and wildlife and lions and a bunch of nature. You know, it's going to depend on what you actually need for your genre of photography. So I think, you know, this camera is a nice step forward for Sony. I think they've actually done bigger upgrades this time than they have in the past. And a lot of people are asking, you know, are wondering if there's going to be an A9R, you know, like the A7R. And, you know, I might take a look at that if it comes out. Who knows? Maybe there'll be an A9R with if it has 16 stops of dynamic range and 80 megapixels, I'd be an idiot not to take a look at it. So, you know, we'll see what Sony's going to do in the future. We'll stay neutral for now. We're not going to get into a camera brand war session here. And if you guys have any questions about anything, as usual, leave them in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. If you would like to stay up to date on all of my latest photography videos and adventures, click the big subscribe button below. And if you would like to find out more about me and how to become a great photographer, visit my website at findingmiddleearth.com.